everyone. I'm Rajiv Behera. I'm the founding CEO of Reflective. Reflective is slightly different from the two companies you saw before. We're actually, oh, that's not us. No? It's the other slide deck. So yeah, Reflective is adjacent to the learning space. We're a talent management company, and we're actually focused on the performance management process that a lot of companies go through, and that's evolving pretty quickly over the last kind of 5 years. And what you're seeing a lot in the market is, how many of you have worked at a company who's done performance reviews? It's everybody, yeah. And how effective are they at helping people learn? Not very effective, right? They're very costly, they take a lot of time. In general, when you think about employees and how they perceive performance management, they think of it as kind of a tax that's very stressful for them, right? So they dread it because their comp is tied to it, and because of that, when they even do get the feedback from their managers and their peers about how they did over the last year, they're so kind of defensive about it that they're not willing to listen to the feedback itself, and they don't learn anything. And so when you think about kind of all these performance management processes, even some learning processes, when you look at the enterprise, they're very kind of compliance driven. So like maybe when they were first built, they were built with good intentions, but over time, they became processes that are very built around compliance. So if you have a learning management system, usually the most important use case is compliance, like security compliance, sexual harassment training. For performance management, it's ratings and comp. So because of this issue, there's like all these issues with reviews, which is, there's anxiety. There's also just kind of ratings bias. So if the whole point of this process is to rate people instead of give them feedback and helping them learn, it should at least do that. But it doesn't do that very well, because if you think about different managers across the org, they have trouble rating people the same way. I might be an easy grader, you might be a hard grader. How do you know, how do I know what I think is average versus what you think is average? That common communication is very difficult to get people on the same page. So ratings are off, and then there's just a lack of alignment in terms of what managers and employees think should be coming out of it. So employees think I'm up here, managers think they have a lot of things they have to improve on. They are disconnected because they're not talking more often. So there's this big kind of process change happening in the performance space, which is pretty exciting. And so Reflective, we're the company that's kind of leading this process change. We're a startup, we're in San Francisco. We've raised $100 million in funding. We have roughly 140 employees, over 400 customers, from a Macy's to an Uber, a Snapchat, an Airbnb, a GE, and companies like that. And what all these companies are doing is they're saying, hey, performance management didn't work as it was, where you did a once-a-year review. And let's change the whole process and the purpose of the process so that it helps people learn throughout the year. So now there's this whole concept of how do we get people constantly learning, and how do we build these better relationships between managers and their employees, so managers are constantly training their employees and helping them learn and get better. So just structurally, the way the process worked was there's a once-a-year review in December, and then roughly 7 or 8 years ago, it changed, and now there's 2 reviews. Now there's one in June and there's one in December. And when I started Reflective roughly 4 years ago, this is where everybody was at. They did twice-a-year reviews. They're very large, expensive processes. And now, so the first thing that we kind of help companies do is, hey, let's at least add more real-time feedback to the process. Let's help your managers give their employees more feedback. Let's help peers talk to each other more often and help them give each other more feedback. And that was actually the first product Reflective built. It's basically a way to give each other more real-time feedback in a very easy-to-use way. And we started doing well as a company because our innovation was we built feedback into your core workflows. So we built it into your email, your Slack, your Apple Mail, your Outlook, your Gmail. so that when you have feedback from somebody, you don't have to leave what you're currently doing. You just give them the feedback directly from your current workflow. And that was a pretty big success, and it helped kind of launch us as a company. But what it really did was kind of solve the fact that it's really hard to get people in a corporate environment to spend time on performance, feedback, and learning. That's kind of one of the crux of the issues. Like, how do you get people to stop what they're doing and focus on something kind of more long-term, which learning and development is long-term. So we decided the only way to actually kind of take the first step in this moving forward is meet the worker where they are and reduce all the friction you can so they actually start participating in this stuff. So for example, like if you think about like how often you looked at your family photos before you had your cell phone versus after you got your first kind of smartphone, it went up exponentially, right? Like you now look at photos maybe once a day versus once a month, once every quarter. And so we're trying to do the same thing with feedback and learning. So process-wise, this is how it evolves. So twice a year reviews, and then adding real-time feedback in between those. So at least feedback is happening more often. And then there's this kind of shift in how companies are starting to think about goals and agile goal management. So there are a lot of larger companies out there who are saying, hey, my company it's too hard to be flexible and agile and pivot when we need to pivot. And we're getting disrupted by our competitors. And you see Amazon disrupting all these other companies and putting all these other companies out of business because they're super agile. They're changing how they do business, and they're changing these markets completely. So now companies are saying, okay, how do we get people to be more agile? So a big piece of this is we want employees and managers to discuss goals constantly, and not about evaluating the goals, but more around, let's just make sure we're on the same page of what should be happening over the next 3 months, and let's have a mechanic to change that if the business has changed. So there's this kind of new way of like thinking about how do you help your managers manage their people. And if you think about like just the manager and employee relationship, the easiest thing to talk about if you're a manager with your employee is tactical stuff, right? Like, what should we work on in the next 3 months? That's a very easy question for a manager and an employee to talk about. And so as part of this process, we're trying to re-engineer the employee and manager relationship. We thought about like, what's the easiest thing, the first step for like building this process and training people on it. And for that, it was like, let's start by talking about tacticals and priority setting. And then let's add on some more real-time feedback. So now kind of the process is, hey, we have goals that change throughout the year. We have real-time feedback given to employees throughout the year. But we still have these twice-a-year reviews. And more recently, over the last kind of 2-3 years, we're starting to see people are starting to move off these reviews, and they're doing what they call check-ins. So what a check-in is, it's basically a way to scale people management. So you think about what I was saying before, like how do you get your managers to give more feedback to their employees, set priorities correctly? There's just kind of this huge gap in how well managers perform and how well they need to perform. And you guys have all worked at many companies. I'm sure you could think of some of the managers you've had that have been amazing, and then some of them have just not been there. And that's just a huge problem. It's probably one of the biggest kind of learning gaps we're seeing in enterprise is just managers not knowing how to manage their employees correctly. They don't know how to set career goals for their employees. They don't know how to grow their careers internally. They don't know how to develop their skills. They're not clear on expectations on what success is. And then employees get unhappy and then they leave. And they're not as productive. So we started moving to these check-ins. And what these check-ins are, they're basically more formal one-on-ones between employees and their managers. So I think most employees and managers have these one-on-one meetings every week, typically, or maybe once every 2 weeks. And in those meetings, typically they'll talk about, hey, what happened last week? What should we go over next week? And they stay very much in the weeds. The best managers will kind of bubble out the weeds every once in a while and talk about, hey, what means success between me and you? Like, if you're going to get promoted, what do you have to do? What skills do you need to kind of improve on? What are you good at already? And here's some feedback on on actual circumstances that occurred that kind of point out why you need to get better at certain things. So say, for example, hey, you're not great at communication, and here's an example. In the last meeting we had, no one knew what the next steps were. We didn't go over kind of the action plan going forward. So next time, can you please work on that? That kind of feedback is so critical for an employee to get better at what they do. So now companies are ripping out reviews, which are kind of compliance focused and based off ratings, and creating these check-in conversations, which basically help their managers have kind of very good conversations around development, skills, feedback, priority setting more often. And then, so the purpose, which is really cool, the purpose of performance is now changing from compliance to employee development. So what does Reflective do? Reflective is a 4-year-old company. We're growing really fast in the performance space. People know us as kind of the platform you use if you're trying to change the full process. And the suite that we have is as such. We have real-time feedback as one of our products, which I said is kind of this integration in your Gmail, your inbox, your Outlook, so you can get feedback directly from where you are. That kind of becomes the crux of how we build things. And then we built performance reviews. We built this check-in product, which does what I was just talking about. And we built this very agile goal product. And we built a coaching product that helps people learn how to do these things in the app. One thing I've always been trying to solve for is how do you get people to learn in the corporate environment? It's so hard when they're so busy and that they don't want to stop what they're doing. They might think they want to take a class, but they never finish the class. So what I was trying to do is build coaching into the kind of the flow of when you're actually doing something, which is when you'll actually be willing to consume the content, right? So if you're setting goals with your employee, maybe there's content on how to set goals with your employees correctly. We'll show that to you while you're doing that. Or if you're having a difficult conversation with your employee, we'll give you kind of a micro-learning video in like the moment so that when you actually need the learning, it's there for you. And then you're more likely to actually go through the learning process because you need it for what's coming up in the next day or so. So we built kind of micro-learning built into our performance system so that when people are doing things, we can train them. And we built it in a flexible way, so we actually are agnostic to different types of coaching and different types of learning processes. We'll just load in different kind of modules from different companies that have their own coaching methodologies. So PM transformation. We started doing a lot of research on this because you guys may have read about this in Harvard Business Review or just online. Lots of companies are now just kind of publishing out how they're changing performance reviews, killing the performance review, and going to real-time feedback, moving to check-ins. So we start, and it's all kind of been like based off of these kind of anecdotal stories. So as a company, we wanted to say, hey, if we're making this change for companies, we want to be able to measure the pre and the post. Like, how is this process change actually helping? So we started surveying end employees. And really what this kind of shows is, and it helps our customers think about is, hey, we should focus on your end employees and not necessarily just the process itself, which ends up happening in a corporate environment. So we asked people the question, I'm satisfied with our current performance management process. And interestingly, only 33% agree with this statement when they're doing the annual review process. Which is super low. If you think about how much time and cost it takes to do that, and only 33% of your people think it's worth it, it's not a good state to be in. And we realized after we changed the process to kind of real-time feedback, agile goal setting and prioritization, and these ongoing check-ins, 82% of employees actually find value in the process. So it's pretty remarkable when you change the process so it's focused on the employee and their development versus kind of figuring out comp and figuring out ratings, you get a really good result. Some people ask why that's the case. Employees want two things. They want more frequent feedback because they need to know what's happening, right? If you want to grow in your career, you need to know what's going well, what's not going well, and you need to see that more often so you can keep getting better quickly. And they want things to be more lightweight. They want these processes, but they don't want to spend time on them. So when they do have them, they need them to be really simple, easy to use, and super lightweight. And so we found that too, and we help our customers measure this themselves just so they know, like, hey, how often do people want feedback at your company? And formal feedback conversations. And most people want formal feedback conversations at least once a quarter. How lightweight do you want this? And then we'll cut the process down, and we'll notice, at the beginning of the process, it's usually way too heavy. We'll cut it down, and people will get a lot happier after it's cut down, which makes sense. And then it just really helps with development and productivity. We ask employees, hey, does the new process kind of help you, does the feedback really help you kind of do your job better? And people agree, it does help them do their job better. So feedback is super key. And it helps just align managers and employees because they're just more in sync and they're talking about this stuff more and more often. So yeah, more recently, our company did this growth divide study. Pretty interesting stuff. We surveyed executives, and then we surveyed employees separately, and we compared the results to see, hey, do they think the same things or not? And we found out that 94% of leaders thought the review process was great, but 61% of employees didn't. Also, we found that a lot of leaders just reschedule the reviews because they're not ready for employees. And lots of employees believe frequent check-ins would improve their relationship and their performance, but they're always just getting delayed. So pretty interesting stats from this study, and if you want to see it, you can check out growthdivide.com. There's a lot more interesting stuff to see how execs look at this stuff versus how employees actually perceive it. And just to end, there's this company that we're working with called Smartpak. They make products for horseback riders. One thing they noticed some of these similar things. They noticed that before these process changes, only 25% of their employees were happy with the annual review process because it wasn't built for them and they didn't develop from it. And it went up to 88% after these process shifts. And there's a lot of other stats here too. But basically, kind of the gist of this is it's pretty exciting if you can change the process, focus on your employees, see what they want to get out of it, which is development and learning, and then build a process around that so that they can develop, they can get better in their careers, and then they're more motivated and they're more productive as well. Thank you. That's all I had. Thanks for taking the time.